Greetings, madam. We are Group 4 and we have chosen to do a guidebook on This is a Photograph of Me by Margaret Atwood. This group consists of 6 members, including myself, Michelle, Hu Yiting, Putri Fakiha, Jemima, Alia Zubaida, and Vanita. So moving right into the aspects of the guidebook, I will have Yiting talk about the introduction of the poem.
Thank you, Michelle. So the poem This is a Photograph of Me is written by Margaret Atwood, who is a Canadian writer, and she is most well known for her novel The Handmaid's Tale, which was published in 1985. This poem in particular opens the collection The Circle Game, which was published quite a bit earlier than that in 1964. But overall, Margaret Atwood's works concern feminism and women's issues. And the poem itself in particular is an extended metaphor for the erasure of women in a patriarchal society. And through the extended metaphor, it comments on how marginalized voices of society are often buried under the accepted narrative dictated by those in power, usually that of the male variety. So this is a suitable poem for young adults as it comments on issues that remain relevant to this day because we're still living in a patriarchal society. Women are still downplayed and thought of as inferior to men. And through this poem, even though it was published in 1964, a lot of the issues it comments on are still relevant today. So I shall pass that on to the next presenter.
Thank you, Yiting. So I will be reading the poem. It was taken some time ago. At first it seems to be a smeared print, blurred lines and gray flecks blended with the paper. Then, as you scan it, you see in the left-hand corner a thing that is like a branch, part of a tree, balsam or spruce, emerging, and to the right, halfway up, what ought to be a gentle slope, a small frame house. In the background there is a lake, and beyond that, some low hills. The photograph was taken the day after I drowned. I am in the lake, in the center of the picture, just under the surface. It is difficult to say where precisely, or to say how large or small I am. The effect of water on light is a distortion. But if you look long enough, eventually, you'll be able to see me. Now we will go into the title and themes.
So I will be presenting on the title and the themes. For the first part, which is the literal sense, the title is This is a Photograph of Me, as it already says a lot, even with its short description, as the title itself is already an opening line for the first stanza of the poem. And in the metaphorical sense, it could be interpreted as the speaker's showing the reader to see what's more behind the photograph. It can also be a way for the speaker to be hiding behind a facade, because back in the day, equal rights, gender rights are not as you could say it's pretty bad back in the day. And moving on, the theme of this poem is feminism, as there are a lot of metaphors and key elements. The poem starts off with describing a small frame and blurry photograph, but soon after, the tone shifts when it was revealed that the woman described in the photo was actually drowned in the lake that was at first we see as an innocent lake, but turns out there are more than what you see. As the speaker, what was it? As the poem was written several decades ago, where gender rights were not easy, the speaker made use of the surroundings and context clues of the photograph of women being not feel validated or even trapped in a male-dominated society. And because of the speaker uses an eerie imagery throughout the poem, it described and it managed to convey how horrible women had to face the reality back in the day. So lastly, to like interconnect the title and the theme of the overall poem is how the speaker shows the perspective and the struggles just in a small frame, and just by the title itself the readers could catch a glimpse of the struggles and the oppression of during the difficult times. And it also in the poem itself we can see the woman was described barely in the surface, meaning that the voices of the people that was suffering could only be hushed and be hidden away by the society's eye. So that will be all for me. I'll be passing the next present to the next presenter.
Thank you, Putri. I will be explaining more on the technical aspects. So first of all, we would like to say what type of poem this photograph of me is. It is called a descriptive poem because of how detailed the narrative is from the speaker's point of view. So this poem can also be explained as a free verse because it consists of 7 stanzas that does not consist or is constrained in any type of form. Each stanza does not end with the common comma or semicolon. And it seems that the sentences also continue to different lines, which is called enjambment, where the lines are not continued in the same line, where the sentence is not continued in the same line, but it is continued in a different line. And this enjambment does help for the readers to set up their own pace and metrical patterns, so they can pay more attention to detail. They can make do of what their own meaning is. So there's also like the creation of end stop lines where readers are allowed to pause and absorb the meaning behind the abrupt conclusion of each sentence. Another technical aspect that is present in this poem is called alliteration, which is also known as the repetition of consonant sounds, which is sounds at the beginning of each word. And within this poem, you can see alliteration in the final stanza, which is the alliteration of the letter L in the line, but if you look long enough, in the 2 words look long. I will pass this to the next presenter.
Thank you, Alia. So, good day, Ms. Shamira. I'll be talking about explaining about figurative language. So, we had found 4 elements of figurative language in this poem. So, the first one is irony. So, as known, irony is a literary term that in which the person delivering the statement says something which is completely opposite of what they mean or what the reality of the situation is. So here the title itself, irony. So the speaker will reveal the photograph of the speaker, but it's turned out to be not a single person's photograph. So if we look into in the poem, we can find it at the line. At first, it seems to be smeared print, blurred lines, and gray flecks blended with the paper. So here, the smeared, blurred, and blended depict the speaker's feeling, not the photograph. So the next element that we could find is metaphor. So metaphor is a literary term used for comparing two unrelated things for rhetorical effect without using like or as. So this metaphor we can find in the line, I am in the lake in the center of picture just under the surface. So here we can find the metaphor in the poem. And other element of the figurative language that we could find is simile. So it is a literary term that makes a comparison showing similarities between two different things using words like or as. So the use of simile can be found in the line, a thing that is like a branch, part of a tree. So in this line, the speaker compares herself to a branch of a tree. And the last one is imagery. So it is a literary term used for language and description that appeals to our five senses. So when the writer attempts to describe something so that it appeals to our senses. So in this poem, the writer or the speaker used the sense of sight, where it talks about light. So light makes a brief appearance in the line 23, where the speaker explain why the body is so difficult to make out, in stating in the line, the effect of water on light is a distortion. So that's all from me. I'll be passing to the next presenter. Thank you.
So in the first stanza, it was taken some time ago. At first, it seems to be a smeared print, blurred lines and gray flecks blended with the paper. In the first stanza, the title of the poem can be interpreted as the subject or first line of the poem because the speaker talks more about the photograph. So as it is evident, the photo is very old, probably like a black and white photo taken in maybe the 30s or the 40s, and it's also distorted, it's smeared. And this is sort of part of the extended metaphor I mentioned earlier, in which the photo is purposefully distorted as to hide the truth behind this photograph, as we will find out later on in further stanzas. And I shall pass that on to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Yiting. So after the second stanza, then as you scan it, you can see in the left-hand corner a thing that is like a branch, part of a tree, balsam or spruce, emerging, and to the right, halfway up, what ought to be a gentle slope, a small frame house. So in this stanza, there is more detail on what can be seen in the photo. So you can see a tree branch that has the distinctive shape of a balsam or spruce tree. And as Yiting explained in the elaboration for the first stanza, the photo is blurry, so you can't exactly make out what kind of tree it is. It only has a distinctive shape. And in the background, halfway up the slope, sorry, not halfway up the slope. In the background, you can see a small frame house. Now, the tree can represent the speaker's family tree, and the house can represent the relationship of the speaker and her family. So it kind of says that though the house is on a slope, like though the relationship is on a slope, it is on the right and only halfway up. It signifies a strong bond and that it may have its own complications, just like any normal family. No family is perfect. Moving on to the third stanza.
So I will be explaining on the third, fourth, and fifth stanza, which follows. In the background, there is a lake, and beyond that, some low hills. The photograph was taken the day after I drowned, and in the lake, in the center of the picture, just under the surface. So these three stanzas can be explained further on the background of the photo, as it describes the presence of a lake and that there's hills just beyond that. So there's more distance created now that we have more information on the picture. So there's also how we can see it is that the speaker lives much more further from civilization than at first thought. And this can also be seen through the feminism point of view, where the speaker feels like they are farther away from how civilization views them. So the next lines also describe very jarring information, which is that the speaker says that the photo has been taken the day after they had drowned. So she is just beneath the first surface. So this can also be seen that in history, in feminism, in the movement, there's a lot that's being hidden, that is just beneath the surface, and the details are quite smeared because the truth is concealed. And how old the photograph could be, there's a lot of blurry information involved. Next slide, please. So this is the final two stanzas, which follows. It is difficult to say where precisely, or to say how large or small I am. The effect of water on light is a distortion. But if you look long enough, eventually, you will be able to see me. The final two stanzas complete this poem as the speaker notes that their location is harder to pinpoint, as well as that their true age is harder to understand, as the water distorts the image and that people cannot really understand what's going on. And under closer inspection, however, there's a lot more of the speaker that can be found. It can, through these two stanzas, it can be defined that more people being attentive, there's a lot more information right underneath the surface. As long as you look long enough, you can understand the true state of a person or the true state of feminism, even though their appearances have been distorted by others. That's all from me. On to for the next presenter.
So I'll be presenting about the comparative analysis, in which I will be comparing Margaret Atwood's poem, This is a Photograph of Me, with Sylvia Plath's poem, The Jailer. So the main thing that I would like to touch on in this analysis is the themes and how similar they are with each other. So both of these poems share the theme of feminism, and it is most likely because of how both of these poems were written in the 1960s. And during this time, in for example, Sylvia Plath's country, America, during this time, there started the second wave of feminism, where many women were advocating for more free rights for them and improvement in education and their positions in the workforce. And this influence reached to other countries as well, Canada as well, where Margaret Atwood was. So other than that, I would also like to touch on the personas and the kind of mood it brings to the readers, because it's quite similar, though quite different as well. So from what I can say is that many readers who have read about their critics on the internet is that they find they feel a sense of horror in the way Margaret Atwood's persona in her poem is portrayed, because the persona is actually a dead person and she is describing her body and where it lay in the poem, while in Sylvia Plath's poem, it's a much more straightforward kind of horror, where she is constantly describing the horrors that came from the woman experiencing horrors in a marital relationship, which is combating feminism issues in a more intimate setting. So other than that, I would also like to touch on the male figure in these two poems, which is the male figure in Margaret Atwood's poem, that is that we're going against is the representation of the entire patriarchal society itself, while in Sylvia Plath's poem it is the male figure of which is in a more intimate relationship, which is with a husband who is mistreating the wife and making the wife go into a downward psychological spiral, which really makes us feel for her. So onto the technical aspects of these two poems, I would like to say that they are both similar in the way that they share free verse in the way the poem is written, and the lines are both in these two poems are of varying length. But however, the differences is that Sylvia Plath's poem is much more longer with 45 lines as compared to Margaret Atwood's poem, which is just 26 lines. We can say that Sylvia Plath really puts her all into describing all the experiences that the persona is going through and the horrors that she's experiencing, to give the readers an understanding on the awareness of what women are actually going through during that time. So that is all from me.
Thank you, Jemima. So now we have reached the conclusion of this guidebook. To summarize the poem, the tonal, as a reader, from my personal perspective as someone who read this poem, on the first read, the tonal shift from a pensive and descriptive one into an eerie revelation, it it created a sense of suspense. Personally, when I read this poem, when I got to the part where she says that the photograph was actually of her after she died, it actually spooked me a little bit. So it made me want to continue reading. I think that the element of suspense is it's very useful for young adult readers because it keeps them wondering what happens next, what happens next. A lot of us are entertained by horror. A lot of us like to scare ourselves. So it takes me to another point where this poem is kind of like a simple ghost story. It talks about a photograph and there's someone there but you can't see it. And it is suitable for a crowd of our age, young adults, because something as simple as we are able to look at something as simple as this and figure out the meaning that lies behind it. It's it's the same thing that we do with our favorite childhood shows, that we will see a particular scene one day and realize that there was actually some kind of dark meaning behind that particular scene, and we are only seeing it now because we are older. And I would also like to address how a literary piece like this is very simply, it looks very simple, but what Margaret intended to do with this poem was to address complex and heavy issues such as feminism and gender discrimination, which also leads me to say that this poem is still very relevant today and can be very relevant for all the years before. Even though it was written in 1964, it could be relevant in the 18th century, the 17th century, because women have always been oppressed by society, because society is dominated by the patriarchy. So until society actually addresses the systematic oppression against women, we will continue to experience discrimination and erasure, and this poem will continue to be relevant for a very long time. So that will be all from us today. Thank you for your time, madam.